You're listening to a Monster Kid podcast.
Welcome to A Dingo Ate My Movie, a podcast that celebrates the weird and wonderful Ozploitation and other Australian genre films from the 70s, 80s and beyond. My name is Pete, and today I'm joined again by Brandon to discuss Brian Trenchard-Smith's family-friendly Frog Dreaming from 1986. Hey Brandon, how are you, mate?
I'm doing great. How are you, Pete?
Good. It's good to have you back yet again.
Yet again, yeah. No, I'm excited. It's really good to be back.
It's great. And today we're talking about Frog Dreaming. Great movie. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Very bit of a, I think for me, a little bit of a bit different to what I've been doing in the past in regards to movies on this podcast.
Yeah.
Probably a little bit different to a lot of the movies that I watch normally. I guess for me it's more of a, I don't know, kids movie, family movie.
Yeah.
But it was a good watch. It was an enjoyable watch and great fun. So I guess let's get into it straight away. So recently orphaned American teenager Cody, who's played by Henry Thomas, lives in Australia with his guardian Gazza. Cody is intrigued with the local Aboriginal myths about frog dreaming and in particular a creature named Donkajin, who lurks beneath the waves near a local abandoned mine. Cody, with his friends Wendy and Jane, decide to take matters into their own hands and investigate. So the film is directed by Brian Trenchard-Smith. Yet again, I think this is probably the third or fourth of his movies I've done, and was released in 1986. Had a budget of $3.8 million, so I read, and reportedly only made like $171,000 at the box office, which seems really low.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It must have made a lot of its money back in like home video.
Maybe. It was interesting. Last night, the last thing I did last night was watch the commentary, and the movie sounded like it was pretty mishandled by distributors, etc. So It was like, the whole story of this is a bit different because there was a director in there who they fired, and then Brian Trenchard-Smith came in and did the rest of the movie. Disney actually was interested in this movie, and the production company said no because they wanted, Disney offered them, I think it was $1 million or something for the film. They were going to make a couple of cuts. They just wanted to get rid of some of the, the swearing, things like that, make it more Disney.
Right.
And they offered them $1 million. The production company wanted, I think it was $3 million or $4 million for the rights. So Disney said no to that, obviously, and they went away and they took it elsewhere. They ended up at Miramax, from what I understand, pre-Disney Miramax.
Right. Yeah, I'd read that as well.
Yeah, and then it didn't get a wide release. It was in Australia. They wanted to release it at Christmas, across the Christmas break, so, probably Boxing Day till the end of January. Mm-hmm. And the distributor in Australia, which is Greater Union, just released, I think they said was August, in the August school holidays. Which is still good in a school holiday, but I think would have done a lot better at Christmas as well.
Right.
So it didn't have a really great sort of release. It was pretty mishandled by the sounds of it.
Yeah, just the little bit of research I've done, it seemed like there was a bit of a troubled production. Like, as you mentioned, when production started in October 1984, Russell Hagg was at the helm as director, and he wrote BMX Bandits, and he was also art director for A Clockwork Orange, which I thought was pretty interesting. But at some point, someone important, I believe it was DeRoche or Barbie Taylor, who were co-producers, they weren't satisfied with the progress, and they split off from Russell Hagg due to creative differences. So that's when they found Brian Trenchard-Smith, who I think was finishing up an episode of a TV show, and asked him to take over. And he was, oh, well, Henry Thomas is attached. Yeah, let's roll with this.
Yeah, he was. I can't remember what the show was called now. It was shooting in Melbourne, and he just shot BMX Bandits, and Nicole Kidman was going to be introduced in that episode that he was directing on this TV show. So he was there they asked him to direct that episode. So he was bringing Nicole Kidman into that. And yeah, really, some of these stories have so much, like a lot of interesting backstory with a lot of these.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, hearing about it just because they're so, like, the Australian film industry seemed so closely knit. You know, it seems very small. Like, there's a lot of, well, as we've seen in your podcast, like, there's so many of the same, same usual suspects who keep showing back up time and time again.
Exactly, yeah. You always hear Everett DeRoche,
right?
Brian Trenchard-Smith, or Anthony Ganane produced a lot of these films.
Yeah, and Brian May.
Yeah. Brian May, we hear him again. The alternate titles, there's so many alternate titles for this movie.
Yeah, so if you're looking for this film, depending on the part of the world that you're in, you might have to look for a bit because it was known as the Go Kids in the UK, the Quest in the US, the Spirit Chaser in Germany, Fighting Spirits in Finland, and the Mystery of the Dark Lake in Italy.
Ooh, interesting. I don't know about the Go Kids.
Yeah, if you Google the Go Kids and look at the UK poster, it looks like a cross between the Goonies and Star Wars. It's a very peculiar poster.
Oh, wow. That's what probably they were going for, the whole Goonies thing, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in Australia it's always been just Frog Dreaming. I've never known it as anything else. So.
Which, out of all of these alternate titles, Frog Dreaming's the better title, I think.
I think so. It kind of, they actually mention it in the movie for starters.
Right. I think the worst is the one for the US, which is The Quest, which doesn't really suggest anything about the movie at all.
No, it could as well be like a Highlander kind of film or something like that.
Right, yeah. Even in the mid-'90s, there was a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie called The Quest, which...
Oh, wow.
That's just, so generic.
It is a bit. Yeah, it is a bit. So, I just think I think sometimes distributors and other people in the industry have trouble trying to label some of the movies that they have to put out, and this is how we end up with some of the weird names. But they obviously got like you said, Frog Dreaming is the one that kind of suits this one the best. And
sure,
there's some very interesting decisions made. The cast and crew. So we had Henry Thomas was playing the lead, and thought he was actually quite good in this. He was 14 at the time, I think.
Mm-hmm,
when he made this. It was a couple of years after E.T. I think E.T. was it 82?
82, I think, yeah.
And this was 86, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was only 14 at the time, but apparently, from what I understand, quite a mature actor for his age.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of an interview between him and Brian Trenchard-Smith, and they were just reminiscing about working on Frog Dreaming. And Henry Thomas was talking a little bit about how he got involved. And Barbie Taylor, who was the film's producer and was a longtime associate of Richard Franklin, she had met Henry Thomas when she was working on Cloak and Dagger, which Franklin directed. And from what I understand, when it proved difficult to find an Australian actor that best fit the role of Cody, Actors Equity approved importing Henry Thomas under, quote, exceptional circumstances, which I thought was, an interesting phrasing, but it reminded me a little bit about what we talked about last time in terms of the union, problems with bringing on Jamie Lee Curtis for Road Games. Yeah,
they were very, very vocal in the 70s and 80s, and very much all about keeping the local actors employed.
Mm-hmm.
So Henry Thomas thought pretty good in this film. The interesting scene for me was his crying scene. Did you see that scene where he's...
Oh, yeah. I have a note about that. We get to see Henry Thomas cry.
Yeah.
Like, we paid money for this.
Yeah, exactly. He was pretty good, obviously good at making himself cry. So that was probably why it was in there.
Yeah. And I think he was at a point in his career where had discussed with his agent and his mother about whether this would have been the best choice to do this film in Australia versus, doing a bigger picture in the U.S. And he was he had so much success with E.T. that I think he was already just burnt out at such a young age, and he was wanting to just be a kid. And but ultimately, I think the story appealed to him, and he did a great job here.
Brian Trenchard-Smith said that he was a child actor who was a bit older, a bit more mature as an actor. He could act and he would make a lot of suggestions, but he was finding that he sort of confided to Brian Trenchard-Smith that he would make suggestions, and people would still treat him as a child. They would say, look, don't worry about it. It's fine. Just do your job sort of thing. And I think he's obviously grown as an actor, wanted to make more of an impact and wasn't able to do so. I think that's one of the reasons that also Brian Trenchard-Smith was brought onto this film, was because they were finding in the early rushes that they weren't getting the performances out of the child actors as that they were expecting. Whereas Brian Trenchard-Smith, from what I understand, has a relationship with child actors where he kind of lets them, suggest things and kind of, talks to them on their level rather than talking down to them. Yeah. And he got a much better reaction from them as well.
Yeah. So encouraging more of like a collaborative relationship rather than
I think so.
Just let me tell you what to do. Just stand over here, hit your mark.
Yeah, I think so. He seems a very nice guy. So I think he'd be probably quite good with, directing children. So
yeah.
Other people in this movie is Tony Barry, who plays Gazza, which is just a classic Australian name for Gary. So I don't know if you know, but if you're in Australia and your name is something like Gary, you're always going to be Gazza. And if your name is Barry, you're going to be Bazza.
Oh, cool.
And if your name is Sharon, you're going to be Shazza. And
interesting. Okay.
This happens everywhere. Like if you've got a name like that, it's always shortened to Shazza or Bazza. Yeah, it's just the way it's done. And so.
But you're not pizza, right?
I'm not pizza. No, not quite. That would be interesting. I don't know what you would be. Yours is too hard. Yours is just Brandon.
Too many syllables, yeah.
Yeah, too many syllables.
It was two syllables, but yeah.
Rachel Friend plays Wendy. It's interesting because when I was watching the movie, I thought, wait, she looks way too old for him. Like, how they have this little relationship, this little teenage relationship. Because she looks older, but apparently they were the same age. They were both 14 at the time. But she just looks more mature. I guess it's just that teenage girl thing where they start to mature more and look more mature. And then Tasman West as Jane, who was like another friend of theirs. And she's a really, really strange character in this movie. She has some funny lines.
She does, yeah.
And she smokes cigarettes, which I think is so funny. And she's probably 10.
Yeah, there's that line when they go off into the woods and they're on their way to Devil's Knob. And she's like, oh, I brought cigarettes for our picnic. It's like, what?
It makes you wonder because there's a scene, I think it's in the when Gazza's talking to the policeman later in his workshop or whatever. If you look behind them, there's bongs on the wall as well.
Yes, on
the shelf.
I saw that, or it was pointed out in the commentary. Yeah,
yeah. I'm like, this is definitely a country town. So, and I think you could note here, script is Everett DeRoche.
Yeah, which I think this might have been his first co-producing credit. I'm not positive, but
could well be. Yeah, they were saying last night that he was very good at getting a script from his head onto paper, and he could kind of visualize what he wanted to see and get it on paper, but he could also do it very quickly as well, and made him quite valuable. They talked of him very, very kindly because he passed on. I don't remember when that was. It was a few years ago now, but he was an American that came to Australia in the early 70s. He's had a very interesting career.
Yeah, I was watching an interview with Quentin Tarantino, and he was talking about all of his favorite exploitation movies. I think he was doing press in Australia for The Hateful Eight, and he was singing praises of Everett DeRoche. He was talking specifically about Road Games. He said you could take that script and not change a thing and make it today, and it would be just as fresh and suspenseful and exciting. And I was trying to locate like a PDF of one of his scripts, just so I was just curious. I wanted to get a sense of his writing, and I couldn't find anything. But I did see that there was a copy of a script road games that sold on eBay probably within the last year. And I can't remember how much it sold for, but it had some pictures of the pages, and I got to at least get a glimpse at like how he writes. Yeah.
We have music again by Brian May. I think comparing to road games, I think this is a much better score.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think it's a much more, it's much more, I guess appropriate for like the tone, like setting the tone of this, I guess we'd say family, fantasy adventure kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely suits it. It's a bit more cinematic in scope, and it's really, really nice soundtrack. I really like it. Not a lot to say. I mean, his soundtracks are very good. As we mentioned last time, he's done a lot of work, a lot of different soundtracks, and he's quite prolific. Where do we watch this movie? So for me, it's available on Prime Video. If you're in Australia, you can watch it on Prime Video streaming. And of course, I picked up the Umbrella Blu-ray. Well, I've had that for quite a while, and that's a really good Blu-ray. Got a funny feeling it sounds like it's got some of the same extras that you got on yours, because I had the interviews with Brian Trenchard-Smith and Henry Thomas. It has a good commentary track as well. Yeah,
the Blu-ray that I watched, of course, it's titled The Quest here, but it was put out by Kino Lorber, or their KL, what is it? KL Studio Classics, I think is what that label is. But yeah, I think a lot of the same features that even in the opening credits of some of the special features says courtesy of Umbrella Entertainment. But one thing I wanted to mention really quickly about that Blu-ray release is that it looks fantastic. Like the transfer is so great, but the cover, the artwork is pulled just from the U.S. poster. It's an illustration, it's a pretty neat poster. It's not as good as the one for the Australian release, but the quality of the cover is so poor. It's so pixelated and it's just a very sloppy packaging. Yeah, which is very aggravating because, as a physical media collector, you pay attention to those things. And so, but I would suggest, because the Frog Dreaming release by Umbrella might be region free. I'm not positive.
I think pretty much all of their Ozploitation that I know of are region free. I think pretty much, I won't say all, but I would say a lot, if not all of their releases would be region free.
Okay.
Which is good. I mean, obviously they understand there's a market overseas.
Sure, yeah.
And I know that they actually, there's occasionally they'll have something on their website about, that yes, you can order if you're outside of Australia, so because you can order directly from them as well.
Oh, okay.
And so you can do that. But they just keep putting out really good stuff, and they always have really good quality. I love the newer stuff they're putting out now. They're putting a lot of the Ozploitation stuff. They're putting into the cardboard sleeves that look really nice. They have great alternate artwork on the other side of the of the cover. So if you pull it out, there's alternate artwork. Or I think what was the latest one I got? I'm trying to remember which one it was. It was Patrick. The Blu-ray I had of Patrick, they do they had a collection. It was the original movie plus the remake from 2013.
Oh, yeah.
They also had, on the artwork side of it, they also had I think also the Japanese artwork for the 2013 version as on the slipcover as well. So they have really good stuff. I plug them all the time, but anyway, they're really good. They're just a great resource for all this sort of stuff, and they support Australian cinema quite a lot. They have some interesting. I don't know if you've looked at their website, but they have some really interesting labels. They have some really interesting movies, like independent films, and it's really good. They have I haven't bought it yet, but they have what's that movie? Is it Slither? Is that the one? I'm trying to remember the name of it. The one that's kind of like a alien. Was it called Slither? I can't remember. But anyway,
sounds familiar.
Yeah, they have some really good genre stuff. I think Reanimator that I have is an Umbrella release. They've got quite a few.
Yeah,
really good releases.
I looked at their website, and it seemed like they had very similar releases as like Arrow Video or Shout Factory, that kind of stuff. So you have a pretty good wide selection of very popular films, but also some harder to find independent or cult films, so I like that variety. And I like that when you have labels that pay so close attention to the finer details and providing some substantial bonus features and great artwork and just with the collector in mind, I think it's really nice.
So what were your initial thoughts on the film?
Oh, this one's been on my watch list for a long time. I knew nothing about it except Henry Thomas was in it until you suggested it. And so I watched the Australian trailer, which was an interesting trailer. It relied very heavily on Henry Thomas from E.T.
Henry Thomas loved him in E.T.
Yeah. So I think they were very interested in selling the film that way, but it gave away no plot point. So I was intrigued, especially since it's another Brian Trenchard-Smith film.
Yeah, what they show I actually like the trailer because they show enough of it to get you intrigued, like you said, intrigued in the movie, but they don't really give away very much in regards to what's going on in the film, which is really good.
Yeah, and very rare these days.
Yeah, exactly. This was also a first watch for me as well. I'd never seen it before. I just thought it would be, like I said, quite different to what we've been doing. It still fits into what I'm doing on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I was quite surprised by it. Like I said, it's obviously aimed at families, aimed at kids. I think they talk about it a lot as being like a children's film, but I think it's just a good family film.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's kind of at the harder edge of a family film because there's a bit of language in it. Mm-hmm. There's a little bit of, I wouldn't say violence. There's no real violence. There's just a couple of sort of scary images, I suppose.
Right, yeah.
Poor old Neville in the shack and all that sort of thing. And it's a pretty fun watch. It's a lot of fun. I'd have no trouble putting it on for, a 10, 12-year-old child. I don't think it's anything in it that would be frightening to them or anything like that, and they'd probably enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that I would call inappropriate for young children.
No. 10-year-old smoking girls, maybe.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. Like I said, I enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. I guess one of the things I wanted to reflect on initially is just like the films that Brian Trenchard-Smith has made and how this is so different. He mentions himself in the commentary that this is probably one of his favorite films that he's made.
Right.
He's really runs the gamut of different genres. So we think you think back to the episode we did. We've got Man from Hong Kong, which is like a kung fu action film, which is just a hoot of a film. And every time I talk about it, I've got, oh my God, I have to watch it again. I think I said it to you last time.
Yeah.
I still haven't, but I need to. Then we get things like, dystopian future, we've got Dead End Drive-In, and then we've got dystopian future and the ultra violence of Turkey Shoot and all these other films he's done. And then to see him direct like a family friendly film like this, I think it says a lot about his style, and he's obviously a bit of a director for hire, but I think he puts a lot of care into what he does and actually, I don't know if every director could really run the to actually have all those different genres that he's covered.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking a little bit about this last night because there are directors who they have a very developed and very, specific style that pretty much everything that they do fits within a very specific framework or genre. But I really appreciate directors who can demonstrate such diversity in not only in genre, but in style. And because this film has a quirkiness that I feel like is characteristic of Trenchard-Smith's style, or at least in his body of work. And quirkiness is probably the only word that I could really land on to capture what I'm trying to say. But I was trying to figure out what we could call this film, because in some of the research I did, some critics mention it in relations to films like The Goonies or Flight of the Navigator or Joe Dante's Explorers comes to mind. It's like a coming of age fantasy adventure, or I don't know. What do you think?
That's what it sounds like to me. It's almost a coming of age film, to the degree that we have, our main protagonists are effectively young children, or teenagers. They're going on some sort of, I wouldn't say the word quest, but they're on an adventure, and they're all kind of growing through that adventure as well. So,
right,
yeah, I think it really comes into that whole, teen coming of age sort of adventure sort of film. It's a little bit hard to label.
Yeah,
which is kind of one of its good points in a way. I
think so too. I like that there is so much like personal growth that's happening here. I mean, there are a lot of things that are so nuanced. Like, the fact that Cody has been taken in by Gaza and like they don't really speak on like, is that problematic, or like what was his history? I mean, they seem to have a good relationship, so that doesn't seem like much conflict there. But Wendy has some friction with her parents, and Cody has this reputation of being, I don't know, it's strange, like a very celebrated local kid, but also, because he's so smart and inventive, but also he's kind of a troublemaker in a way, because Wendy and Jane hanging around with him, that's causing problems at home because they're getting into trouble, and that Cody's putting them in danger. So I don't know, that's a little interesting, but yeah, I probably had a better point that I was getting to and I lost it.
I think the only cliche that kind of gets touched on in this really for me is the whole, the piece about, like you mentioned, about Cody being the inventor and the adventure sort of kid, and then the cliche of him being a bad influence on the two girls. It works for the film. It's a very hard movie to pinpoint exactly what it is. That's why I guess I just called it a family film, because that's what it is, right? Yeah,
it is. And I think another element that's really interesting that we'll probably get to is that they're at an age where, they have very active and ripe imaginations, where they're drawn by their curiosity of by this mystery of what is in this pond. They're at an age where they're in danger of losing that sense of intrigue or curiosity, and being able to imagine all of these fantastical things. I don't know. I think that probably plays in to some degree.
I'd agree with that as well, because they do. They have that wonder that you have in your early teen or as a child.
Right.
And when you get into your early teens, you start seeing the world for what it is as you get older and older, obviously.
Right.
And there is a bit of that in this film as well. It's interesting. I'm still, and I know I'm going off a tangent here, but I'm still not 100% sure what actually is, like, we know it's in the water.
Right.
But we don't know the why. They don't really make out the why.
I'm conflicted about that. So I definitely want to get your thoughts when we get there at the end.
Maybe it's meant to be ambiguous.
Yeah. I mean, we have that rural folk element that we've seen in lots of different genres that, they're set in small towns or remote areas, and there's something mysterious in the woods or wherever, and something that is whispered about that gets kids interested and to go to check it out. It's a good example.
So I suppose we could walk through the plot and get a bit of a feel for the plot and discuss some of the points as they come up. So we open in the quarry, and there's lots of scenery, lots of shots in this movie of frogs and lizards.
I was expecting like an Attenborough voiceover throughout, because we get so much wildlife in this movie.
But what's really interesting for an Australian movie that has lots of wildlife, there was not one kangaroo in the shot.
That's true. That's true. We have everything else. We've got, my goodness, there are owls and lizards and goodness gracious, what else? There's birds of all kinds.
And frogs.
And many, many frogs, many types of frogs.
Yeah, so we have the scene with Neville, I think his name is, in the boat.
Right.
And he's obviously fishing in the middle of this pond. I don't know where you would fish there because it looks pretty, the doesn't look like there'd be many fish in that pond at all.
No.
I think he's there more just to relax, right? And,
right, relax and get drunk.
Get drunk. And then we see this whole thing. We see the bubbles starting to come up from the bottom of the lake, and we start seeing the windmill start spinning and all this turbulence. And it takes him a while to figure it out. He's been fishing. He's got the fishing line along his finger, across his finger.
Right.
And it kind of gets pulled, obviously, by the turbulence, and that's what sort of brings him to, makes him alert to see what's going on around him. He eventually gets his boat to the little dock that's there, and then the boat just goes away and sinks. It's taken in by whatever is in the water, and then we just see the look on his face, and then we cut away, right? Yeah,
no, it's great. It's a great opening. And the editing especially, I feel like it effectively showcases Brian Trenchard-Smith's ability to amplify the sense of danger and horror while also establishing like the geography of the quarry and the pond.
Yeah, it's a really good scene. He's really good at opening movies like that. When I think about his other films that he's opened up, we had the great scene Man from Hong Kong, which is a great opening, and there's so much stuff. Interesting scene. I don't know, because later on we find what's left of Neville, but I don't really know whether there's been time passed.
Oh, right, yeah.
Because when you see Neville later, Neville looks like he's been there for probably 10 years. Right?
Yeah.
But
there's not much left of him.
No, but it doesn't. Yeah, anyway, it's a bit. That's a bit strange. Once again, I don't think it's really explained. Like
what happened to him?
Well, one, it's an they say, I think, in the movie that he had a heart attack, right?
Right, yeah, his ticker because all of the drinking.
Yeah, but also he was a dentist. I think Henry Thomas's character says he was a dentist from Sydney or something from the city. Yeah, but he doesn't quite, look that way. And then we get introduced to the kids, and we get our introduction to Cody in a workshop, and he's got that weird face mask that he's made up, the welding mask, and he's building this attachment for his bike.
Right, yeah.
So he can ride it on train rails, which is really interesting. But it's a really good scene, actually, to introduce us to him, because we've got the workshop and everything else, and we have this whole scene where he modifies his bike and then he goes out, and the whole town is kind of like into him riding his bike on the railway line.
Right.
Except for the policeman.
Yeah, it took me a minute to piece this together, but because we'll get an explanation a little bit later, but his experiment here is to ride the tracks from the train station to the school and see if he can make it in 3 minutes or less. Interesting scene when apparently when they were filming this, there's a few shots of Henry Thomas from below looking up that were done on the back of a truck. To make him look like he was moving. And then the other shots are a stunt double. Right, yeah. His stunt double, I'm trying to remember his name, but he doubled for him in the cliff jump later. But he was also his double in E.T. and Cloak and Dagger, I believe. I think this was the last film they worked on together because Henry Thomas was outgrowing him. Right, yeah. So apparently when they were filming this scene, there was, I don't know how this would happen, but apparently the gauge of the railway line changed. So in other words, the width between. Oh. And the bike just came, there was some accident anyway. And luckily Henry Thomas, I don't think was riding, or he was riding at the time, but nothing really bad happened. But there was a bit of an accident. Anyway, this whole scene is really cool, how we've just got the scene of, him getting there, getting started, the kids all around him. He gets started on it. Then they all take off on their bikes. All the cars take off. And we've got this great shot of the bikes jumping across the road, the push bikes jumping across the road, and then the cars going down the road. It really evokes BMX Bandits. You could see where he's kind of done the same thing again, where he's got the kids on their BMX bikes and they're all riding to the next spot to watch him. And if you came to see this movie because of Henry Thomas and E.T., we get him on a bicycle right from the jump. That's what we came here to see. I think I have a note that he needs a basket on the front of his bike.
I'm surprised they didn't kind of play to that. But anyway. He comes off. Does he come off the train? Oh, there's like a little train thing. I guess it's like a maintenance.
Right. Yeah. I was going to ask you what that was, but yeah, I think it is some kind of little maintenance car.
Rail maintenance cart coming the other way. So he has to jump off the track and goes down and crashes into like the bush at the bottom.
Yeah.
Which is really, really interesting. He, I think his stunt double did all of that. They were going through it in the commentary, like this is Henry and this is his double and this is Henry and this is his double. And, but it was really well done. Once again, really well cut.
Right.
Really well directed. It moves. It's very kinetic in regards to this. And I think this is one of the things I was talking about when the previous director was directing. And one of the things I didn't like, there was a lot of stationary shots, almost like it was being shot for TV.
Mm.
Whereas Brian Trenchard-Smith's like, well, this is a film. I've got to shoot for film. You can't just have stationary shots everywhere. And, you know, you can see in all his movies how much he likes moving the camera around when he can. So it's really well. These first couple of scenes are just really well shot.
I agree. Yeah, I think you made a good point about just the kinetic energy in at least the first probably 15 minutes of the film. And so, I mean, it's a good way to get that buy-in from the audience, you know, so they're immediately engaged and you have their attention. And so, you know, they're with you for the rest of the film, hopefully.
It's just interesting, this whole scene, that obviously he has some standing in the community as being, like you were saying, like, you know, the whiz kid or whatever he is. And because half the community ended up going out to watch him do it as well.
Yeah. There's just so much like fanfare around it and excitement. Everybody's driving out to, to see if he's able to make it or not.
Anyway, so he has the crash. They're going back to home and he's walking his bike back, and his bike looks in a lot worse condition than you would think it would be in. But anyway, I think the seats are skew. There's mud all over the bike and etc. So they're arranging to have a picnic the next day, him and the two girls. And they're just going to go wherever they're going to go. And then there's the scene where I think Wendy goes home. Is that right after this?
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
For some reason, Jane decides to play this trick on her mother, which makes her think there's a poltergeist in the house.
It's a great bit because, yeah, Wendy's parents, like her mother is talking to her husband. She's like, Oscar, do you hear that? It's a poltergeist. It's like, no, it's the wind. It's like, but there's no wind. It's the not wind. Just making Lois, his wife, feel like she's not that bright, while we can see outside that Wendy's got some kind of little setup just to create some noise outside.
So the next day, the kids go out and decide to go on their picnic, and of course, Jane's brings the cigarettes, and for some reason, I don't know why, but anyway, they basically go off and decide to have a picnic, and they end up, I don't know why they end up at this place called, the name of this place is really interesting, Devil's Knob.
Right.
Right, so they end up at Devil's Knob, which is part of a national park. I don't know why they go in that direction. Is it because Cody knows this area, or is it?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I believe because he does mention something about frog dreamings, and he's explaining to them that these were sacred Aboriginal sites. And so I think maybe just their curiosity has gotten the best of them and their, but yeah, I don't really know what it is specifically, like what their end goal is, or like where it is that they're going, or if they're just kind of wandering around.
It might be just as simple as they kind of see it from the walking track.
Yeah.
When I was originally watching it, I was like, part of it looks like they're on a walking track. Some of it doesn't. And I'm like, how are these kids going to get out of here, like find their way out? Because they're just sort of walking in the bush. And if you walk too far in the bush, as you probably know, you can get lost quite easily because everything ends up looking kind of the same, right?
Right.
And there's a scene where obviously Jane's trying to light her cigarette. And then it cuts really strangely to her eating a witchetty grub or finding a witchetty grub.
Yeah. Yeah. Because someone on the commentary mentioned that it was a kind of rite of passage to eat one. But
for kids in Australia.
Kids, yeah.
I've eaten one. Tastes like chicken. I don't know. It's I can't remember the taste. It was years ago.
Yeah. I think Cody says that it tastes like nuts or something.
I don't know if it's a rite of passage anymore. It might have been in the 70s and 80s, maybe.
Yeah, especially maybe in the country or, in the more rural areas.
So they find themselves out at Devil's Knob. They are looking around the area and they're a bit scared. And this is the scene where the girls go onto the little pontoon.
Yeah, they find the pond and there's this line, which I thought was pretty funny. I can't remember who said it to who, but it's like, what's that smell? Well, probably your breath blowing back in your face. I was like, oh, that's pretty good. But yeah, Cody says that, Neville's been camping here. Yeah, Jane and Wendy, they're just hanging out on this, little float or raft kind of thing, a platform. And it carries them out and they get scared. And that's when Cody jumps off that big cliff and swims to the rescue.
I was kind of like, if you really want to drown yourself, you jump into deep water wearing jeans.
Right.
And what looks to be like a denim jacket.
Yeah. Yeah, he does have on a lot of layers.
A lot of layers when he goes into the water. And the first thing they tell you to do if you fall into water fully clothed, generally, is to do things like, remove clothes like jeans and things like that because they end up weighing you down.
Right.
But they don't do that. And through this whole movie, every time he's in the water, he's fully clothed.
Right. I thought that was...
just seems so strange.
Yeah, very strange. Yeah.
Because in a lot of movies, if you're going into the water, you would go into the water in swimmers, like in your togs or something.
Yeah.
It's just a bit weird that he was, even when he went back later with the diving bell made of the fish tank.
Right. Yeah, he's still wearing
full clothes.
And shoes. At one point,
shoes.
He's wearing his shoes.
I could kind of understand shoes in a place like that where you don't really know, especially if you're going to be at the bottom.
Ah, right. Yeah.
And you don't really know what's going to be on the bottom.
True. Yeah.
But wearing 2 layers of clothes is just really strange. Anyway. So he brings them in and they're not looking, they're looking towards the land and behind them the whole thing's starting to bubble up and the windmill starts spinning again, I think. Mm-hmm. And then when they get out, it sort of stops. That's the first time you see the creature come up out of the water.
Yeah. Yeah, just looks like this big mass, like a black mass of garbage or something. Like it's really indistinct.
I'm sure they do that on purpose as well. They sort of, make it look that way.
Yeah.
That's when they find Neville.
Poor Neville.
Poor Neville in the little shed. Neville, like I said, looks like he's been there for about 10 years.
Yeah, I wonder if just the birds and other wildlife had been picking at him or something over time.
Maybe. It's strange. Like I said, there's no, do we think he was there for a year? Did the first scene happen a year ago?
Right. Yeah, that's not really explained. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost explained like it happened the day before.
Right.
They got there. Yeah. Almost. But and it's a little bit confusing that way. But yeah, anyway, they find him, the girls scream, and then we jump to the next scene. A little bit I forgot about, the bit where Henry Thomas jumps into the water and he gets the kids. I think is it Jane who says something about, oh man, that looked unreal or something like that. That was unreal when he saves them.
Yeah.
So her acting is so funny. She has the weirdest lines. And then the line where she pulls out the tadpoles in her hand.
Oh, right, yeah.
And she says they look like sex. And I'm like, what the?
Yeah, what does that even?
I didn't notice it the first time. Second time I watched the movie, I put on subtitles just to make it a bit, so I can understand a lot of the dialogue. And I was like, have they mistyped the subtitles?
Right.
So I went and listened again. And no, she said they look like sex. And I'm like, oh, okay, maybe that's some weird, of course they're tadpoles, right? It's just, it's a bit strange, but it's funny.
Yeah. I was watching it with subtitles too, and I also was a little confused by that.
She has some weird lines in the film.
Yeah, she does. She, out of all of the characters, which I think is good, like it sets her apart so that she has a really unique kind of true to her character dialogue.
And there's also, and this goes throughout the movie, and I won't stay on this because I think we talked about it in some of the other episodes, but in this movie, they call Aboriginal people blacks a lot.
Yeah.
And there's even instances where they're calling them abos and stuff like that. So if you're offended by that sort of stuff, just be warned. I just think it was interesting they're calling them blacks because I was like, I don't think I've ever heard Australian people that I know of call Aboriginal people blacks ever. Mm-hmm. And which made me think, especially when I heard later on that part of the reason this movie was financed was to sell internationally,
right,
and to sell in the US. And I think it might have been easier for them to use the word blacks because it makes more sense to an international audience rather than abo, which is a terrible word, or anything else they want to call them. But yeah, it's one of those things. Once again, with a lot of these movies from the 70s and the 80s, we have, different sensibilities then, and it's just the way it is.
I wonder if that's something that Everett DeRoche suggested, or if that was part of the script, since he was, an American who moved to Australia. Like, I wonder if maybe he was importing some of that language.
It could have been. Then I think this is a bit where Cody asks Wendy on a date. They've got a dance at the local church or something like that. And poor Wendy gets grounded after her little adventure because they end up what happens? Because why am I having a blank? So they go there. He sort of takes the kids away. They find because they go back to town and tell the police about Neville. Then Wendy and Jane's parents go off because they shouldn't have been that far out or shouldn't have been there. And they're with Cody, and Cody's a bad influence, etc., etc. So they get grounded. And he'd already asked Wendy to go to the dance with him, and she goes to the workshop to give him that note. There's that great little what is it, a little vampire guy on the bicycle or whatever?
Yeah. Yeah, he set up this little thing on a wire or a string, and there's a note that says, "Don't pull this rope." And, of course, she pulls it, and this little vampire or something rides out and scares the shit out of her.
And on the back of it, it says, "I told you not to pull it." Or something like that. And she leaves the note, and then it just falls off that he doesn't know. They don't really play much of that. Like, it's one of those classic things where she can't meet him at the dance. She leaves a note. She makes an effort to leave a note. She even sneaks out of her home to do it.
Right.
And he doesn't see it because it blows away in the wind or something like that. And we get that great scene at the dance. So he's at the dance with Gazza, and Gazza hasn't got a date, and Wendy never turned up. So they talk about them being both bachelors, and they spend the night dancing with all the other single women that are just sitting in a line across.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting scene, the dance scene, because there's a rockabilly band playing. And I guess that was kind of the theme of the party, because other people are dressed in kind of rockabilly fashion, and it just caught me off guard. Like, is or was rockabilly popular in Australia?
Yeah, so the band's called El Prezos, which is a weird name anyway. They were playing 50s rockabilly rock and roll. So it's always been a thing in Australia. So for about 7 years or so, I played in a band that played not rockabilly music, but rock and roll music. So we'd play 50s and 60s stuff. So things like, oh my God, Rock Around the Clock and all those sort of things. And we would play in a lot of these clubs in Sydney. And it was quite lucrative work. Like I used to have a day job, but also do this. And I would play out of a year, I would probably play nearly every weekend, 2 nights a week. I was working a lot, and there was this whole group of people who used to love 50s and 60s music, who used to dress up in all the sort of 50s style and do the rock and roll dancing, and there'd be rock and roll dance classes and things like that. So we would be playing to these people almost every weekend, and then you'd have your normal punters there that were just there to, dance normally with a band. And so we would be playing music like Rock Around the Clock, and we'd be playing lots of 60s music, 50s, 60s stuff. And they were a really interesting bunch of people because they were very into what they were doing.
Yeah.
And a lot of the clubs, they liked having them there because it filled the club up, but they never bought a lot of drinks. They would always drink water all the time. And so that was what I always heard, that it was great for filling the club, but they never really drank a lot of alcohol, and that was always the issue.
Oh, okay.
So, but it was fun, and like I said, they kept us employed for a couple of years, but they were really strict. Like there was an anecdotal story in the band I was in that the drummer before me, they wrote a petition to the band that was signed by about 50 or 60 of these dancers, where they asked the band to replace that drummer because he didn't play perfectly in time for them.
Oh, okay.
So what they want, I'll get a bit nerdy here.
Yeah.
What rock and roll dancers like is they like hearing what I call what drummers will call 4 on the floor. So it's basically just straight 4 beats to the bar. So your bass drum's dropping on 1, your snare drum's dropping on 2, and then your bass drum on 3.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's very basic in most cases, but they really like that there because it's easier for them to dance to.
Oh.
So when you play off that a little bit and you try to sort of, add a bit more complexity to it, then they don't like it so much because they can't anticipate where the beat's going to fall, even though they should really have it in their head anyway. But they don't hear that 1 and 3 on the bass drum, or basically a lot of the time you just play 4 on the bass drum. You're just playing those 4 beats on the bass drum while you're doing all your other stuff. And that's what they wanted all the time. So they apparently put together this little petition and asked the band that I was in before me to get rid of the drummer. They didn't get rid of him, and I didn't join because of that. But that's something that happened. So they're an interesting bunch, and there's still quite a few people that sort of like that sort of music. But it's, to me, I think it's pretty much died out as a scene in the clubs in Sydney. I'm sure there's still pockets there that still do it, and there used to be this festival up in Coolangatta every year. What was it called? Because we actually went and played there a few times. Anyway, whatever it is. Coolangatta's up near the border of New South Wales and Queensland. Was it called Cooley Rocks or something like that? And it's like a whole celebration of that 50s, 60s music and dance. And, they would all the dance. That was like a big yearly event. And they'd have, cars from that era and all sorts of events going on and dance competitions. And then they'd have about 5 or 6 clubs in the area that would have bands on during the night or during the day, and they'd have a main stage in the middle of one of the main streets in Coolangatta, and you'd play on that stage and they'd all dance and whatever. So yeah, it was a pretty big thing, and that was probably in the 90s. Let me think. Probably because my daughter was born 94. So it was around that era that I was kind of doing that. So it's probably in the mid-90s, just up to around, I know I was still doing it around 2000 because the band I was in, we had a New Year's Eve gig in 1999 going into the new century or whatever it's called. And that was a really big deal because there was a massive shortage of bands that year because there was so many venues doing New Year's Eve parties and there wasn't enough bands. So it was a great year to be in a band because you could pretty much name your price.
Right, yeah.
Which was fantastic. And that New Year's Eve for me was great. I was sitting there, we did 3 sets, I think, and I can't remember exactly how much I was getting paid, but I remember looking at the set list, each set as we were going through. I was like, "Ooh, I just made $30 from that song. I just made $30 from that song," or something like that. So it was really good. So yeah, so the whole rock and roll thing kind of has died out a bit these days, and all live music has kind of died a bit these days. But
yeah, right.
it's pretty bad. We'll get back to normal eventually. So yeah, so the whole scene, the dance scene, is a very it's kind of a fun scene in a way. It's kind of a bit different, and it's really interesting. You notice at the end of the night, Cody's driving his dad back in the car.
Oh, right.
He's a 14-year-old kid driving a car, but that's pretty much country town and stuff.
He talks to a friend after the dance and learns about Charlie Pride and is told that he lives somewhere on the coast. And so now he's on this quest to find Charlie Pride.
That's right. Not Charlie Pride, the country singer.
Right.
And once again, I didn't pick it up the first time. The first time I watched it, I thought, Charlie Pride, that's the country singer. And I didn't hear the dialogue properly the first time. When I watched it the second time with the subtitles, I think Cody says something about country singer Charlie Pride.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. And so this is a very, very strange sequence here where he goes on this, he gets on this boat and he goes like fishing for crabs with all these people, and he's having a feast with these Aboriginal villagers. And one thing that I wanted to bring up here is, like Road Games, I read that the film takes some liberties with the geography. So like the town scenes are set in Woods Point, which is in the Highlands of Victoria. Yet the scenes with the villagers are set in a coastal environment, which would be about 3 hours by car, according to the research that I did.
Yeah, I think you're right. It seems like they've made the location to be sort of like you said, in a country town, but obviously, a coastal area close by. I guess it's feasible. I mean, there's plenty of places in Australia that kind of, you can look like you're in the middle of the bush, and then 10 minutes later you can be, at a beach, or 15 minutes later you can be at a beach.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've just done it to have these scenes.
Yeah.
With the Aboriginal community that are there.
Which Cody could have been on this voyage for a long time, because it seems like a lot of time passes, because when he finally gets to Charlie Pride, it's at night. And of course it's a very, foggy evening. But this is a really cool shot, like of them on the pier, like Charlie's in silhouette. There's this fog, and it's a very blue shot. We get some moonlight, and then the amber light of the hanging lamps. This is probably my favorite shot. And funny enough, it reminds me a bit of that one shot from the motel in Road Games.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It is a great shot. They did some on location. They did a lot of that in studio apparently as well.
Oh, okay.
So the bit where he's walking down the dock towards the house at the end of the dock, or the place at the end of the dock.
Yeah.
It was all shot in studio, and they used forced perspective, so made the house smaller so it looked like it was a longer dock.
Oh, that's cool.
So the parts where he's walking down the dock towards the house are all in the studio, forced perspective, and then the other parts are on location. So it's a very interesting shot. Yeah, it is an interesting shot. And I think what's the reason he's walking down there? I think Charlie Pride says to him, it's like a rite of passage, so he says, for men in Aboriginal tribes.
Right.
And he sets up this thing where he's walking down the dock, and there's this eerie sort of creature at the end of the dock. And when he gets down there, he finds that it's just it's hanging up, and they've made it, whoever's there has made it look like some sort of creature. And it kind of foreshadows the ending of the movie.
Right. Yeah. It's the, yeah, well, we'll get there. But one thing that happens here that I thought was, that I laughed at, was he finds this long fluorescent light, and for a moment he pretends it's a lightsaber, And it's just, you know, a little fun little Star Wars reference there.
I thought that too. I thought, doing a Star Wars reference. And I guess, you know, if we're looking into the time it was filmed, obviously someone Cody's age would have known about Star Wars, right? Mm-hmm. So that would have been it's probably the first thing I would have done at his age if I'd picked up person like
yeah, and even in E.T., like there are lots of Star Wars action figures that his character plays with. And so just little things like that I thought was funny little crossovers.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I thought that was really good. I actually like the scene with the Aboriginal community and them getting the boat out. When they were filming that scene, that they used local Aboriginal people to do it. So to drive the boat, the guy was, you know, just a local. He wasn't an actor, and he didn't know when he had to stop driving the boat as it drove away from and they ended up having to send someone running down after them going, hey, come back. So he just kept going.
Yeah. I in the commentary, I believe Trenchard-Smith says that he spoke to Aboriginal people to be very transparent about what, how he was going to represent their community in the film. And so having their blessing and their support was very important to him in getting this film made.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good because it kind of, you know, it shows that respect, and you can kind of see the respect in the movie as well, except for the term abos. But you can see that in the film, and I always love these movies that have that Aboriginal influence and have that whole thing about, you know, the dreaming and all their legends and their, you know, myths and their stories and things like that. I just think it sort of grounds a movie like this in something that is, you know, we talked about this a little bit on the last episode, but, you know, these are the original inhabitants of the country, and to have it grounded this way, I think makes it more interesting, a more kind of, I don't know, it just gives a few more layers to the film.
I agree. And one thing I wanted to bring up here briefly, and it's not necessarily a criticism, it's just a point I wanted to make, is that about the Charlie Pride character, how he's used reminds me of a trope in American fiction and film, often referred to as, and this is kind of a problematic term, but the magical Negro or mystical Native, in reference to like America, Native Americans, like this figure who serves merely a narrative purpose of helping white protagonists. And you can see this in especially American, like big Hollywood movies like The Green Mile or Ghost or What Dreams May Come, and Poltergeist 2 comes to mind. It's just serving as a connection to something magical or spiritual, like keepers of arcane knowledge. And so I wouldn't say that it's used negatively here, but I think it's, you know, it's a trope. It's just a narrative device that I think is used here. So I just wanted to point that out. Yeah,
agree. So then we get Cody looking for Donkagen. So he's down at the pond. He's got his camera. How old's that camera? I was watching him take the photos and getting the little wheel at the top and spinning it around.
Takes me back, yeah.
I was like, oh, wow, it does, right? It takes you back. And now you just pick up your phone and off you go. He's kind of looking for all that stuff, and he's got that he made a cannon.
Right, he made some kind of cannon, and he's also brought some bait, that big like rack of lamb or something that he took from home.
Was it a 3 kilo or 4 kilo rack of lamb or something they're talking about?
It was massive.
There's a scene where the cop is there with Gazza, and he's sort of questioning Gazza as if to say to him, you know, you're not looking after this kid properly. He's like, what's he got to eat? And he goes, oh, in the fridge there's like a 4 kilo leg of lamb. And he opens it. Oh, he was a 4 kilo leg of lamb in there.
That's a good little
And I'm
game.
like, what? You just get the kid to eat out of that fridge? The fridge door doesn't even close properly. It's funny. It's a funny scene. That's the scene that's got the bongs in the background as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if that was before or after. I think it happens at the same time. I think Cody's out doing all this, and at the same time, the policeman's sort of questioning.
Yeah, we see him a few
Gazza,
times, I think.
Yeah, there's a few. And they're kind of questioning his stewardship of Cody a little bit. Because it sounds like Gaz is pretty open with Cody, kind of lets him do pretty much what he wants to do within reason. He makes a few good points. A kid that's 14, you can't, tie him down too much, especially in a country town. There's sort of always that sort of thing where they're out and about and do their own thing.
Right.
But so he's looking for Donkajoon. He's taking the photos. And also, is Charlie Pride in this scene as well, I think?
Yeah, he shows up. He's watching Cody.
That's right.
From the top of cliff.
That's right. Yeah. And then like I said, we've got Gazza having the conversation with the cop about, he's saying, the kids in this other family are screwed up because of Cody.
Right. Yeah, it's like you need to have a talking to with him. And he's like, yeah, okay, all right, whatever.
And then there's also the scene, I'm not sure if it's in the same sort of area of the film, where Gazza's out working on a plane. He's obviously a mechanic, and he's out working on a plane, and the father of Wendy and Jane goes out to see him and basically tells him to keep his son away from my kids, sort of thing.
Yeah, sport.
Yeah, sport. He's that word all the time. That's such a it's a classic old Aussie term, but you don't hear it very much anymore.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I remember, I think it might have been when we did Man from Hong Kong, and there was a discussion about the use of mate and like an overuse of mate in a certain context. I can't remember, but so I was curious about sport as a term of companionship or an endearing term. Like I wasn't sure, I guess, if that implied anything or if it was just like a familiar.
You would probably use it in a lot of cases. It's kind of used as I don't know what you would call it in the English language. It would be like, hang on there, sport, or what are you doing, sport? Kind of almost like that.
Yeah,
a bit kind of aggressive, but it's not really a word that's used much anymore. Like I think my dad still uses it sometimes, but he's from that era, right? So he'll still use the word sport, but it's usually, like I said, a lot of the time it'll be in kind of a questioning or almost accusory sort of way.
Or like a condescending sort of way. A little bit.
I wouldn't say it's condescending, but it could be used that way.
Yeah, maybe in this scene a little bit.
Yeah. But I think Gazza picks up on that, and that's why he's kind of throwing it back.
Right, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So very interesting interplay there.
Yeah.
But it's really, really cool. Then we get this scene where Cody goes to see this bearded guy. What's his name? Mr. Kaufman.
Mr. Kaufman. Yeah, I was like, what is his role? Like, is he like a librarian? Or like?
I think he's an author, right? Or something.
Oh, okay.
Because he mentions he writes books or something like that.
Yeah.
So he goes to see him and talks about, different, what's he talking about with him? He talks about the whole, thing at the lake, and I'm not sure that Mr. Kaufman takes him very seriously, but.
Yeah, he's like, well, there's nothing like this on the map, and well, let me look in this book, and Cody's like, does that book mention Donkajoon? No, not really, but here, you can take this book with you. And there's a great line when Cody's like, do you believe in monsters? He's like, son, for 15 years I was married to one, or whatever.
That's quite a good line, that. And then we get the scene where Cody goes back home and he's in the workshop and he's looking at how he can, he gets the idea. He goes into a shop, doesn't he? Into a pet shop or something?
I think so.
And he sees the round fish bowl.
Yeah, the fish bowl.
Yeah. And he decides, he goes, I could use that. And so he obviously gets that, takes it home and concocts this, basically a diving bell thing.
Yeah.
Right? What's it called? I don't know what they call them in those days, but like a diving helmet. And he's got this great, like he's using this theory that obviously these things were based on, I'm assuming, of the water pressure creating air that would pump into it.
It's a pretty sophisticated contraption that he's built or that he's working on. It is. And just his ingenuity to test it out, test his theory and stuff is pretty cool. And of course, he gets a little bit of, I wouldn't say he gets into conflict with Gaza, but they do have that moment where he's like, hey, you should probably, stop this bunyip theory, which I want to stop for a second. So bunyip was a new term for me. I had to look it up. So is that more like just like a mythical?
It's a mythical creature.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's a funny scene. I mean, it's not a funny scene, but it was funny to me just because Gaz was like, promise me you'll stop this. And he's like, I can't do it. And he starts crying his Henry Thomas cry. And I was just like, yes, he's doing it. Like we see him on a bicycle again. And now we get the bonus of seeing him cry. So we can all say, poor Henry Thomas, look at those sad eyes.
This wouldn't have anything to do with your bunyip theory, would it?
My theory?
Hey, come on. Where have you been the last few days?
Oh, here and there.
Hey, listen, what you do is your own business. But there's a limit. And the limit comes when it starts affecting other people.
Well, what are you on about?
Cody, I can see what you're up to here with your bush pump, and I don't like it. Now, I want you to promise me you'll stay away from that pond.
Why?
Because I'm your guardian. And I bloody tell you to.
Jeez, guys.
Oh, come on, Cody. How often do I ask you to promise anything? I want you to promise me.
I can't do that.
You can and you will.
When you were my age, and you wanted to do something, and your parents wouldn't let you, because it was too dangerous, would you have promised them, or would you have lied?
Hey, you and I have never had to lie to one another.
Exactly.
We'll talk when you calm down.
It's Henry Thomas's greatest hits.
It really is. I'm trying to think of, because he's had a pretty good career since then as an adult actor, and I'm just trying to think back if he's had any crying scenes. I'm sure he has.
I'm sure he has. Yeah. It was interesting to find out that he actually suggested that scene to Brian Trenchard-Smith.
Oh, interesting.
And actually wrote his own dialogue for that scene.
Wow. That's impressive.
Which is quite amazing for a 14-year-old child.
Yeah.
Right? Well, not child, he's a teen. So, yeah, quite impressive that he wrote his own dialogue. But he wanted that scene in the movie. So, yeah. Obviously, he was a big fan of his own crying as well.
Yeah, I think that's how he got the role on E.T. was he auditioned for Steven Spielberg, and he had a very emotional scene where he cried a lot. I think because E.T. had died or something, and then like immediately after the audition, you hear Steven Spielberg say, "You got the job," and so yeah, that's what his crying is what kicked off his entire career.
When was the last time you saw E.T.?
Oh goodness, it's probably been a year or two. I used to watch it pretty frequently.
Yeah, I haven't watched it for a long time. I bought the Blu-ray a couple of years ago, and I don't think I've watched it since I bought it, only because, this is rather embarrassing, the movie does make me cry, right?
Oh, it makes me cry too. The ending, I still cry.
It's an amazing movie. It really tugs at your heartstrings.
Yeah, it's a good
I'll have
one.
to watch it again. Yeah, because it's a great movie. It's a really good movie.
I think there's a 4K release. I don't know.
Oh, that would be cool.
Yeah, I don't know if it's region free or not. I'll have to check.
Okay.
But
I think 4Ks are region free.
I think so, yeah. Because I think that is the original theatrical version, because a while back, I think maybe 15, 20 years ago, Steven Spielberg did the kind of George Lucas thing where he went back and he's like, okay, well, I want to add some stuff and we're going to make E.T. CG in some scenes. And we're going to remove the rifles from the policemen and put walkie-talkies in their hands. And so that was big at the time. Like, yeah, here's the new version of E.T. But since then, I think Steven Spielberg had a change of heart. And so you can't find that version anymore.
Okay,
so
interesting. Yeah.
So anyway, you should be able to find the theatrical version, no problem.
So then he has all these stuff together. He has his big cry, and then he goes off. And the next thing you see him knocking at Wendy's window, and he's asking for her assistance to be able to sort of come down to the quarry and help him out, because he wants to have a look at what's actually down there. And he's even made a waterproof case for his little camera. I don't know how he was going to move the little spinny thing, but
oh right, yeah,
but yeah. So he's done all that, and he's got a spear gun with him, and so they go down to the quarry, and he goes into the water. He tells Wendy that he has probably 3 minutes of air or something like that.
Yeah.
And he goes looking down there, sees all this stuff, goes past there's the bit with the laughing clown.
Yeah.
So they're really cool. I saw that and I go, oh, it's a laughing clown. I don't know if you've got the same things there when they have. So I used to have it at the Royal Easter Show, or it's like a fair sort of thing. We have these games. So the laughing clowns were like these clown heads that would move side to side slowly, and you would put a ball in its mouth, like a tennis ball, not a tennis ball, a ping pong ball, and it would drop through. And at the bottom, it's like a pachinko machine kind of thing before pachinko machines existed. And at the bottom, there's like 10 little slots, and they all have scores on them. And you would drop it in his mouth, it'd go through, it'd come out the bottom, and whichever slot you got in, you won a prize or something like that. They would have it at like the Royal Easter Show in Australia, or fairs, or things like that.
Oh, okay.
Have anything like that where you're from?
Yeah, similar. I can't remember clowns, but yeah, but that setup sounds very familiar.
Yeah,
like at fairs, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what that was. That was kind of creepy when you first see it before he wipes off all the moss and everything. So, ooh, it's creepy. So
yeah, no, that's something I really liked about the scene, because we're pretty much right with Cody. Like, we don't know what's down there. We can only see so much, like, because the water is so murky, visibility is very low, and I think it's just great directing, great writing, like just building suspense and keeping the tensions high. And because we see that clown figure, and at first you think it's a corpse or something. And so, but there's that, and then cutting back to Wendy looking at her stopwatch, and we just see his time running out, like he's running out of oxygen. And so, yeah, I mean, just that is making us very nervous, but we're also anticipating seeing the Donkogen for the first time close up. And so, yeah, I think all of that happening at the same time is also like in the opening sequence. It's very kind of kinetic in some way.
Yeah, and all those underwater scenes were apparently shot in a pool, in a large pool, and they were shot by Ron and Valerie Taylor, who shot all the live shark scenes for Jaws.
Oh, cool!
And also did a lot of other work for movies in the 70s and 80s. If you're doing underwater shots of sharks and things like that, they would do that sort of thing. So they used him for the film there. Yeah, so very interesting stuff. So he's in the water for some time, and then he just kind of disappears, right?
Yeah.
It sort of stops, and then Wendy pulls up the helmet, and obviously he's not in it, and she straight away assumes he's dead and jumps on the motorbike and rides back into town and does a great crash when she gets into town. and the whole scene of her being consoled by everyone and telling him he's gone under the water, and straight away the policeman goes to Gaza and says, hey, guess what? Cody's dead.
Yeah, I was like, you are a terrible policeman. You don't even investigate.
Oh, we better go and investigate, yeah. He's dead, forget him. Just leave him. He's dead.
Yeah, he was
he's gone.
Yeah, what does he call him later? Like a top rate kid or top
like
notch or something.
Yeah. It's just strange. Like, and then Gaza, the actor, does this great scene of kind of looking distraught. He actually looks quite good as a distraught person. He does a pretty good job.
Yeah.
But I'm still like, why would you just tell him like that when you don't have proof? He could have got out of the water. He didn't, but he could have got out of the water between Wendy leaving and coming back, or anything could have happened.
Yeah.
So anyway, they decide to go down there and obviously pump the water out of the pond. Mm-hmm. I don't know where the water was going to go because there's a lot of water in that pond.
I wasn't sure either.
And they pump all the water out of the pond, or not all of it. They get a fair way down, and they have this scene during the night where they're having a chat, and I think that's where the policeman says, he was a good kid and all this sort of stuff. And then they're just they're having a beer. They're sitting there having a beer.
Yeah.
It's kind of almost like, my son's dead, but, whatever. I'm just going to sit here, have a beer and reminisce a bit.
Yeah. I'm just going to remember him and reminisce and grieve.
And then Wendy goes off to Kaufman again.
Yeah.
So I don't know how she knows him.
How does she even know that Cody and him had this little powwow, this little chat?
Yeah, exactly. And, before that scene, she goes into the workshop.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And she finds all the clues in regards to what Cody had thought is actually down there, because there's a model of the excavator that's in the pond, in the fish tank, going up and down with the bubbles.
Yeah.
And there was a fair bit of discussion in the commentary about what did they think basically giving the ending of the movie away during that scene. Mm-hmm. And the conversation was around, well, if you take that scene away, the ending of the movie doesn't really work as well. Mm-hmm. So they need to at least clue the audience in that there is something going on. So she finds all that information, about the excavator, and then she runs off to Kaufman and tells him all about it. And then all of a sudden we've got another great scene, which I've seen in so many of these movies, where everyone's charging out of the pub to help. Happened in Razorback. It happened in a few other movies. So they all
just a convoy of people. Yeah, caravan.
And it's one of those great scenes, one of those classic scenes where the whole community's coming together to save the little boy in the well, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. And we have divers on the way, and then and it wouldn't be a Brian Trenchard-Smith movie without a helicopter.
Oh yes, we've got the Channel 7 helicopter and the two divers. Yeah, it's really funny. It's good. And it turns out that he's caught inside the excavator in must be what's a pocket of air, right?
Right.
And this part of the excavator is what looks like the Donkogen when it sort of comes out of the water.
In silhouette or in shadow, it looks like a T-Rex or something.
Yeah. It's really well done. And so they all get down to the quarry, and all of a sudden Gaz is not too bad now because there's a chance that he's alive, and they sort of trying to get to him. The divers go down and they knock on the metal, and he knocks back, and then the machine comes up out of the water and opens up, and there he is inside, but he's got his legs stuck on something, and he eventually gets his leg unstuck and jumps out and swims to shore, and we watch this creature sort of shedding all the stuff that was on it until they realise that it's effectively an old mine. It's old mining equipment that was in the bottom of the lake. I still don't tell you what the bubbles. Why the bubbles and why there's pressure?
There's a quick line that I think Wendy has where she says something about there being granite, something underneath, and there's air escaping through that. And that's what's essentially animating this bit of mining equipment, this excavator.
Okay, so granite and some sort of fissure, and there's air coming up out of it, or gas or something.
Right, yeah.
That's what I kind of thought. I thought, maybe there's some fissure in the ground under the water, and there's some sort of natural gas rising up through it or something like that.
Right.
I was probably overthinking it, but I was trying to think logically, which you shouldn't do in a lot of these movies.
Well, we should mention too that one of the locals says it's a donkey engine.
That's it. Yes.
Yeah.
I noted that down.
So, donkey engine? Donkogen? Yeah. Oh, okay.
He eventually jumps out, gets to the edge of the, river and the lake, and they're all climbing up the hill, and Cody turns around and says, "Oh, did anyone get a photo of that?" And obviously everyone laughs. And
oh, yeah. It's like, it's all good now. We can all go home and celebrate.
Then we jump to, I think, the next day. Mm-hmm. And Cody goes back to have a look again. I'm assuming he just can't stay away at this stage. And he sees Charlie Pride, I think it is, on the other side. Or I don't know did he actually see Charlie Pride? He does, doesn't he?
He does, yeah.
Yeah. And this is where we get the whole name of the movie, where he says there is a dream time, there is a frog dreaming, and all this sort of thing. And all of a sudden, Charlie Pride's there and waving his arms, and all of a sudden, everything that was at the side of the lake, including the hut and the windmill thing, ends up being dragged into the lake, and essentially consumed. And this is the point of the film where I'm thinking, hang on, now we're getting into like magic or some sort of, strange. Before, the whole movie could be explained by, there's some sort of geological thing that causes this old machine that was left in the quarry to come up and down. But now we're in the realms of fantasy where there actually is something in there. Yeah,
I was really puzzled by this because, like, as a viewer, like, there's just this great catharsis once we realize that the Donkogen is just that excavator, and it's being moved by air from the pond bed. But it's like that moment that Cody has on that dock when he thinks that there's a monster at the end, but it's just an old jacket or just a piece of cloth or something. It's like we feel relieved, just like Cody and the rest of the townspeople. Oh, there's nothing spooky going on here. We can rationalize, or we can explain it away very easily. But yeah, it seems to imply that there is a mystical element at play here, but just not in the way we were led to believe, that this is a sacred site. And I don't know, I kind of read it as there's essentially an erasure of, the mining camp, like modernity, or, of progress or of civilization, or the kind of imperial force, that has displaced Aboriginal people. Or
I see where you're going.
Yeah. And so I'm still trying to work through it, but I think
so. They're just bringing the earth back to its natural form.
That's
sort of thing.
I think so.
Yeah.
Something along those lines, perhaps. Yeah.
It is interesting. Like I said, there's bits of fantasy in the film, but the bit where he's walking down the long dock and finds like the fake creature, like I said, it foreshadows the ending a bit.
Yeah.
But then at the ending, we get this whole fantasy piece, because in that scene in the dock, it's just something that's been created by hand to look like a creature.
Right.
The lake is an old piece of machinery that was left there and is now, because of some weird geological thing, going up and down. But then when Charlie Pride comes back, it turns out that it's actually more than that. And they're sort of, like you're saying, he's kind of like deleting, for want of a better word, everything that was there prior.
Exactly.
And bringing it back to its natural form.
Right. There's something there, and I wish I could better articulate kind of what I'm thinking, but I think that it's there for a reason. There is a message there, I think, because otherwise it would feel very tacked on.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a good way of bringing closure to it, but also reigniting that sense of wonder. And so I think that the film is very successful in that regard, but I think it's also just inaccessible enough to leave people struggling to make sense of it.
Maybe it was meant to be that way. That's sort of more open sort of.
Yeah. And I'm fine with that.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah.
It's a good ending for me. Yeah, it's just that it goes from something that's very mechanical and live to something that's mystical. And I guess there's nothing wrong with that. And like you're saying, we've just talked out, I guess, between us a bit of an understanding of what the ending actually means, really. It's kind of like that whole bringing everything back to normal again, or back to how it should be.
Right.
So I don't know if they go inside the earth. I'm not going to think that far to think that.
It reminded me a bit like the ending of Poltergeist, where the house just implodes. Do you remember? Or it just disappears. It just is distilled into like a dot of nothingness. That's kind of.
I remember that.
Yeah. Similar idea.
Yeah, I guess it's similar, yeah. And that's pretty much how the movie closes out. Then I think Charlie Pride just fades away. He's wearing like traditional sort of like Aboriginal headpieces and his face painted. He looks, it's a really good look as far as that sort of Aboriginal dream time sort of first people sort of look is. It's really, really good. Interesting how they shot it. They had some shots of Henry Thomas there that they'd shot before he went. There were some shots where they just got somebody that looked like him from the back to shoot to make that sort of work and things like that. So, yeah. The only other tidbit I have that I thought was interesting that I forgot to mention before, that when they were doing ADR for this, they were planned to do ADR at some stage. Henry Thomas's mother got in touch with Brian Trenchard-Smith and said, you really should do the ADR now because his voice is starting to break. So they had to rush to the US to do the ADR so they would get it all done before his voice broke.
Oh, wow. It was a critical time, yeah.
Yeah. But, yeah, so good movie, really, really enjoyed it. It caught me by surprise. I didn't know what to expect. I was a little bit hesitant not hesitant is the wrong word, but a little bit of trepidation coming in, thinking, this is very different to the sort of films I've been doing. But once again, it's good to have a bit of variety and have some different movies in there. I really enjoyed the movie. I thought it was really good. I thought it was quite respectful in most ways and how it treated the Aboriginal people. They were quite a big part of it. I was happy with the acting. The acting wasn't that bad. Some of the lines especially from some of the from I think Jane, maybe in particular, seemed a little bit forced, but they were funny, and I really liked that character. She was really quite funny. But yeah, I thought it was a really good film. It had the right amount of adults helping the children and the children being sort of one step ahead. I shouldn't say children all the time, they're teenagers, but being one step ahead of the adults in a lot of cases. And it was quite mysterious, and you didn't really know, like we were just talking about, you didn't really understand in a lot of cases what was happening and where things were going to go, which I think was great. And all in all, really good movie. How about you?
Yeah, no, I really liked this a lot. And the more we talked about it, the more I liked that misdirection and the mystery building. And like, I would have loved this as a kid. And I feel a lot better about the ending now that we've talked about it. But I think that overall, I like the tension that it builds in some scenes. But there were a few scenes where I felt like the movie slowed down a little bit, maybe a little too much. Maybe it's just a personal thing. I think the pacing in the middle dragged a little bit at times, but overall, I think those moments where it's really kinetic and things are moving very quickly, and so I think that made up for some of those moments that lagged. But yeah, I think this is a fun time. I liked, the kind of fantasy adventure elements and just seeing kids, in a small town trying to entertain themselves and amuse themselves while also dealing with adults. They're trying to put them down and to not let them have any fun, that sort of thing. Which, as someone who grew up in a very small rural community, I can relate to that. So, but yeah, no, I thought this was great. I'm really glad that we watched it and talked about it.
Yeah, I was really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed doing this episode. Actually, it's been quite an interesting movie to sort of talk out what we liked about it and all the other pieces. That's really cool. Now, I was going to ask you to tell me what you're doing at the moment, but I think seeing I only spoke to you effectively 2 weeks ago, you're still doing the same sort of thing, right? You're still doing Slugs.
Yeah, we're doing Slugs over on the Gory Picture Show, and on Varicon Video, we'll be talking about Christopher Nolan's The Prestige.
And what podcast have you been listening to lately?
Oh, I'm finally getting around to Test Patterns episode on Suspiria 77 in 2018. So I'm a little bit behind on my test pattern, but I'm trying to get caught up there.
Yeah, I'm a bit behind on a few of theirs that I need to catch up. I think I'm pretty much almost halfway through that one, and it's really weird the way I listen to podcasts. I listen to, if I can, I'll listen to them end to end.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of them that are quite long, I'll start listening to them, and then for whatever reason, I'll stop because I'm doing something else.
Yeah.
And then I'll see something else pop up, so I'll start listening to that. And then eventually I'll go, oh, crap, I really should go back and finish listening to that.
Yeah. For me, it's kind of like reading a book. Like you read a little bit, you put it down, you might pick up another book, read something else for a while, but then you just pick back up where you left off. Which actually, I was going to ask you, have you heard of one called Podsploitation?
I have.
Yeah.
Know them quite well. Yeah.
I was just looking, I didn't get a chance to listen to it, but I was looking to see, if someone else had covered frog dreaming. I was just to kind of get a better sense of some, attitudes towards it. And I came across Podsploitation. They're up at episode 34 now, but there's a pretty good selection of stuff. And I think it's all done by native, Australian folks.
Yeah, it's good. It's interesting, like since I started, I've been finding other, podcasts that are doing the same sort of thing, which is really good. I mean, there's definitely room for all these views of these different movies because everyone has different opinions, right?
Sure.
Everyone sees a movie in a slightly different way. So I think it's really good. It's like, I guess it's like anything. If you're talking about horror podcasts that I listen to a lot of, there's millions of them, right?
Oh, sure.
But they all have something different to say, and they all do it in a slightly different style. And so that's, to me, is part of doing a podcast. Like what I'm doing with this podcast is reasonably niche, but there's other podcasters doing the same thing. But like I said, there's room enough for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, between you and guests, I mean, there's a lot of different lived experiences that are informing how you read or interpret a film and its significance, but also, there's just a lot of cultural things that you're bringing to it. Like, I mean, not with me not being Australian, there's a lot that I'm learning or that is unfamiliar to me that we can talk about. And so I think that, there's a lot of cool stuff going on there.
Yeah, there is. I like doing the podcast. I like doing this podcast with overseas guests because I think it does bring a different perspective to the movies. Like, there's often, you'll occasionally ask questions about why do they say that or what does this mean, and it's just an interesting view. And then you, because you're outside, might have a different view of it than I do because I'm closer to it in a way.
Right.
And some of the other guests are the same, and it's interesting who I have on like sketches loves doing like the monster ones. So we did Razorback, and I think next week we're planning to record Dark Age.
Oh, cool.
And which is a fantastic movie. It's great fun. And and you get different perspectives, and there's a couple of, people I know that have their own podcasts in Australia and that I will eventually reach out and invite them onto an episode. But I think it's really good to have a little bit of flavour from people that aren't in the country, and that was always my idea as well, to have that extra flavour and that, because they look a bit different. I don't know. It's hard for me because when I grew up, you grow up on Hollywood movies, so they become just like movies to you. And I'm assuming I don't really have a view of American movies of being anything different. I don't know if that's saying the wrong thing, but they're just movies to me. And I guess the same thing to me would be like watching, I guess, a French movie, like more of a niche movie in France or a niche movie somewhere else, and try and react into that. Whereas when you're brought up on a staple of Hollywood movies, everything's American.
Right.
But yeah, still have an interesting view. It's more with TV that I have an interesting view of American TV. And sometimes I never got the joke about that you see on American comedies, or I don't know if you see it anymore, but you used to see in American comedies all the time. I never got the joke of people walking around with toilet paper out of the back of their pants. Have you seen that joke?
Oh, yeah. I've seen that.
I never got that. It's like,
I don't really get it either.
it's like what? They wiped their ass and they forgot to get rid of the paper or something. It's like,
and I guess that's funny. Yeah. I don't know.
I never really got that, but yeah, it's just interesting. And like I said, I've been waffling, but it's just good having different views, and whether that comes from an Australian person, an American person, a British person, whatever. I think, or just a person. Everyone brings their own opinion, right?
Right, yeah.
So, and has their own things they like and don't like. So, yeah, so it's been really good. Okay, cool. So thanks again for coming on. It's really good having you on the show. I really enjoy the backwards and forwards and the conversation, and you bring a lot to the show, and I really appreciate that. So thanks very much for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me. I had a great time and looking forward to coming back.
Oh, you'll be back, don't you worry. All right, so when we return, we'll have a look at what's coming up next.
And now, preview time. When it comes to entertainment, you can't beat a good film. So let's take a look at what's coming your way.
For over 200 million years, the crocodile has roamed the swamplands, coexisting with the people of the land. Today, it faces its greatest predator.
There was another attack last night. 2 fishermen.
Fishermen, that's a laugh. They were poaching.
Poachers or not, they are people.
Looks like you've done it well and truly this time, Besser.
Me? It was one of your crocs that did it, not me.
This is the one we thought we'd never see in our lifetime, Matt. Pity we have to kill it then. Yeah.
You not get him that numb and worry. Him smart. Him belong this river.
I've got to stop it. I don't want to hurt it, but I've got no choice.
Don't you understand? Numb and worry carries the spirit of the people. That's why he says he can't be killed.
Devil get him. He tried to kill that crocodile and devil spirit get him.
Where is he? Where's he gone?
Same one, isn't it?
Looks like it. I'll tell you one thing, Harris. If you don't want to catch the bastard, I'll make bloody sure I do.
Stevie's not worth bothering.
Piss off, Rhoda. Come on, cut it out! Leave it alone!
You people frighten that crocodile. You frighten animal, it's killed.
I've organised spotter planes and there's a reward out. $5,000.
You tell me how to solve the problem.
We catch that numb and worry.
Catch him alive and bring him back.
Why do you always have to be a hero?
Now, I've told the minister the problem's solved. I've told him it's over.
If anyone touches that croc, they'll be sorry. It's alive, all right, and that's the way it's going to stay.
Dark Age.
Next on a Dingo Ate My Movie, join me in Sketches as we head to the Northern Territory to hunt a saltwater crocodile in 1987's Dark Age. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this episode. Thank you to all my guests who give their time to make this podcast possible, and a special thanks to you for listening. Don't forget, you can follow a Dingo Ate My Movie on social media. We're at Dingo Movie on Twitter, Dingo Movie Pod on Facebook and Instagram, and on the web at dingomoviepod.com. If you'd like to support the show, head on over to Patreon and sign up for early episodes, bonus episodes, and other goodies. Check us out at patreon.com/dingomoviepod. And finally, we love feedback, so please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, or drop me a line at pete@dingomoviepod.com. I take feedback very seriously, and it helps me to improve the show for you and all the other listeners. Once again, thanks for listening, stay safe, and I'll see you on the next episode of A Dingo Ate My Movie.
Mr. Kaufman, do you believe in monsters?
Monsters? Son, for 20 years, I was married to one.